Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of The Score with Brett Wiseman here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio, TobaccoRoadSportsRadio.com, 1470 WWBG AM Greensboro. We are here, right here, every single Saturday morning. We hope sincerely, though, that you tuned in to our MLB trade deadline special, our Frankly Speaking Sports and The Score with Brett Wiseman combo team up Tobacco Road Sports Radio MLB trade deadline special on Tuesday. We had a lot of great interviews, a lot of fantastic guests on that show. It was a ton of fun, and a lot happened during it. Of course, some trades went down in the days leading up to the deadline. We talked a little bit about those last week, but a lot after Larry and I left this show for the weekend last Saturday. A lot went down in the days following, into Tuesday, and into the 6 o'clock Tuesday deadline. So, in case you missed any of it, because there was a lot, let's take you through. We'll skip over the minor deals, I suppose, but you know, there were a lot of deals, and we'll kind of break them down a little bit. But let's take you over the course of them first. Things really kicked off as far as larger moves were concerned. July 25th, we talked a little bit about it. Dodgers went out and got Kike Hernandez from the Red Sox. So they got shortstop depth. They acquire him, and then they go out and get Ahmed Rosario from the Cleveland Guardians for Noah Syndergaard and cash. Couple of minor moves in between there, but the Dodgers went out and got the shortstop they needed. The Marlins bolster their pitching staff. They got Jorge Lopez from the Twins. And you look at the Angels. They take Shohei Ohtani off the trade block. Hours later, they acquire Lucas Giolito and Reynaldo Lopez from the White Sox for a left-handed pitching prospect and a catching prospect. So they're all in. Brewers go out and get a left-handed bat or switch-hitting bat in Carlos Santana. Marlins acquired David Robertson on July 28th. That is what tipped the scales as far as Max Scherzer was concerned with the New York Mets. We'll get to that in a second. Dodgers on July 28th, they went out and got some of the pitching they needed, not all of it. Lance Lynn and Joe Kelly from the Chicago White Sox. Biggest piece of the three-player return back to the White Sox. Trace Thompson, of course, Klay Thompson's brother. Astros went out and bolstered their bullpen. Kendall Graveman, they're able to get him from the White Sox. And then we move to July 29th. Max Scherzer. Full no-trade clause. Has a giant contract with the New York Mets. David Robertson gets traded almost instantaneously after that trade goes down and is announced. Max Scherzer comes out and says, I need to have a word with the front office, because I don't like the direction that this is going. About 12 hours later, the Rangers and the Mets have a deal in place for Max Scherzer to go to Texas. Max Scherzer has a full no-trade clause and a player option worth $43.33 million for 2024. Not only did Scherzer waive his no-trade clause to go to the Texas Rangers, he went ahead and exercised his player option. So he's in for 2024. The good news for the Mets, though, able to get Ronald Acuna Jr.'s brother, Luis Angel Acuna, the Rangers' number 3 prospect, the 44th overall prospect in all of baseball. So good return there for the Mets, I would say. Then the Cardinals' fire sale began. Jordan Hicks to the Toronto Blue Jays for a couple of right-handed pitching prospects. And then Jordan Montgomery and Chris Stratton to the Texas Rangers from St. Louis for a shortstop. And then 2 pitchers, one of which at the major league level, the other a prospect. Braves got infield depth. They get Nicky Lopez from the Royals. Angels continue to add on. They have injuries abound. Mike Trout, and then Mike Trout's replacement, Mickey Moniak's been on the shelf, on and off it. Angels go out to the Rockies and get C.J. Cron and Randall Grichuk for a couple of pitching prospects on July 30th. Aaron Savali. Now, this is a trade I wanted to circle because this could come back to bite Tampa Bay at some point. Yes, they bolster the starting rotation, but they give up a massive prospect, the 37th overall prospect in baseball. He was the Rays minor league player of the year last year, had been raking at Durham with the Durham Bulls, which is the Tampa Bay Rays AAA affiliate not far down the road. Kyle Manzardo. So Aaron Zavali's controllable for the Rays through the 2025 season, meaning that's when he's eligible for free agency. But you give up Kyle Manzardo. We'll see how that plays out in the long term. Diamondbacks fixed their bullpen woes. They gave up a lot to do it. Josh Rojas, Dominic Canzone, a couple of really good outfielder combo guys for Paul Sewald to be the new D-backs closer. They also go get Andrew Chafin from the Milwaukee Brewers. They sent Andrew Chafin to the Milwaukee Brewers. Mark Canha from the Mets on July 31st. He goes to the Brewers, so the Mets continue. Cubs become buyers. They get Yeimer Candelario from the Nationals, designate Trey Mancini for assignment. Giants make a minor move. They get A.J. Pollock. And then we get to the larger deals that were completed on deadline day. And the first really big domino to fall on Friday, as we scroll through things, it took a while for things to kind of get going on deadline day. But once Justin Verlander, that was the big question going into deadline day, because the thinking was that a lot of the larger deals had already been made. So the real question was, all right, the blockbuster domino that everyone was waiting to see if it would fall was going to be if the Mets went full fire sale and moved Justin Verlander. They did. Not only did they move him, they moved him to the team that he's been with for the past 7 years prior to, won 2 World Series and a Cy Young with. That would be the Houston Astros. Now back to what Max Scherzer had talked about with the front office. In Max Scherzer's first media availability with the Texas Rangers, he said, oh yeah, the Mets' plan is to compete in 2025 or 2026. They told me that. If you look at the deadline for them, things are trending in that direction for the New York Mets, which no one understands. But then again, when do we ever understand the Mets? This is why the phrase LOL Mets should be in the dictionary at this point. Because every 3 or 4 years, we get to this point with the Mets where they spend a lot of money, they get a wealth of talent, and then they throw it away for no particular reason. They're only, like 7, 8 games out of a wild card spot. They're not out of it. They're not in the Cardinals spot. They're not 10.5 out in their division and 9 out of a wild card. The Mets have the talent to make a run. Excuse me. They just chose to take a 5-yard delay of game penalty, drop back, and punt. Again, for some unknown reason, no one understands what the Mets do or why they do what they do. They're just the Mets. And we'll leave it at that. Anyways, the return for Justin Verlander, pretty sizable, actually, when you look at the prospects that the Astros got back in that trade. They got the Mets number 1, or the prospects that the Mets got from the Astros in that trade, I should say. The Mets got the Astros number 1 and number 4 overall prospect in that trade. Big time. The outfielders Drew Gilbert and Ryan Clifford. The 68th overall prospect, Gilbert is in Major League Baseball. But again, number 1 and 4 in Houston system, which 1 and 4 in Houston system or 1, 2 in a lot of other people's systems. So keep that in mind. So the Astros, or the Mets, got a large return, but the Astros, I think their hand was forced a little bit when you look at the scope of the American League West, a division that the Astros have owned for the past 4 or 5 years. ever since 2017 when the whole sign stealing thing happened, which was also, ironically, the first year Justin Verlander, first of 2 Cy Youngs that Justin Verlander won with the Houston Astros was that year. But anyways, beside the point. So the Astros, they got a couple guys on the shelf pitching-wise. Excuse me. I know Framber Valdez threw a no-hitter hours after they acquired Justin Verlander, but Lance McCullers Jr. has been on the shelf here and there. They've had some instability in the starting rotation, so starting pitching was already a need for them, but I don't think they were in the market for Justin Verlander, and I also don't think Justin Verlander was available until about 48 hours before the deadline. And about 6 hours before it, at about noon, not noon, but you would think that's when the discussion started. Trade didn't get completed until about 2:30 on Tuesday, so about 3.5 hours before the deadline. I think the Astros' hand was forced a little bit by the Angels going out and getting Lucas Giolito and Reynaldo Lopez. They not only bolster the rotation, they bolster the bullpen. And look at how good Reed Detmers has been for the Angels. So the Angels are all in. And from the Astros' perspective, usually this is the point in time where the Angels are like, yeah, we're mediocre. We're just gonna stay put. They did what we've been wanting the Angels to do for, 10 years. Go get pitching. They got it. You put Ohtani and Reed Detmers in a rotation with Lucas Giolito. Pretty good. That's good for a best of 3, best of 5 series. Wild card division series scenario. And they go out and bolster the offense. You look at the Rangers. Boy, do they get pitching. Keep in mind, they have Jacob deGrom. He's just hurt. Keep that in mind. They go out and get Jordan Montgomery and Chris Stratton. So they do what the Angels did. They go out and get a number 3, number 4 starter in their rotation. And they go out and get a good bullpen piece to kind of bridge the gap to Aroldis Chapman, who they acquired in June from the Kansas City Royals. And then, bam, they get Max Scherzer, of all people. And I think at that point, the Astros were kind of sitting there like, oh, crap. Other teams in our division are trying. This is bad. Yeah, we got to do something. I got it. Justin Verlander. Fortunately for them, the Mets were doing Mets things. So the Astros, I don't think, were really in a position where they felt like they had to go get a top-level arm at any point in time until they saw the deals that the Angels and the Rangers made. And I think the tipping point really was the Max Scherzer trade. They saw the pitching that the Rangers got when you couple what they brought in with the guys they had in place, like John Gray heading the rotation and Josh Sborz being a mid-level bullpen piece that at that time was bridging the gap to Aroldis Chapman. The Astros' hand was forced big time because they're no longer the top dog in the AL West. And this is going to be, to some people, a bit of a hot take, but I don't think the Astros are the best team in that division. And I also don't think the Astros are the best team in the American League. The Texas Rangers, the way they're constructed, the fact that they're healthier right now than the Houston Astros, the fact that they have more pitching than the Houston Astros do right now. Again, I know, I'm going to hear it. Oh, I got Justin Verlander. Framber Valdez just threw a no-hitter. I'm looking at a complete rotation and a complete bullpen. Not no-name middle reliever to Ryan Presley. Not no-name fill-in AAA rotation guy from the Round Rock Express behind Verlander and Valdez. I'm looking at guys that have proven they can do it. If Lance McCullers Jr. comes back, then we might have a different conversation. But you look at the rotation, you look at the bullpen for the Rangers. Remember, they don't even have Jacob deGrom. What if by some miracle Jacob deGrom comes back? Think about that. When you add him to Max Scherzer, John Gray, Jordan Montgomery, and a bullpen of Josh Sborz, Chris Stratton, and Aroldis Chapman, even in as hitter-friendly a ballpark as the Rangers have, that's hard to stop. That is so incredibly hard to get anything off of. And then it becomes one of those situations where if one of those three starters is out there, you got to get them early. If you don't get those guys in the first 3 innings, then they go, remember these are old-fashioned starters, by the way, so they're going to go 6, try and eat out that 7th inning maybe. But then you've got the bridge bullpen guys. You've got the setup guys, and then you've got Aroldis Chapman. So if you don't get them in the first 4 or 5 innings, you're not going to get the middle relievers, and you're sure as heck not going to get Aroldis Chapman coming out of the bullpen at 6'6" from the left side, throwing 103 miles an hour. It's not happening. You're simply not going to win it at that point. Then you look at the offense for the Texas Rangers. It's been great all year. We've talked about the pieces a couple of times on this show. They go out and get a backup catcher in Austin Hedges to get some depth at that position behind Jonah Heim, a good defensive catcher, but not an inept bat. So for me, and this is not just because I've hated the Astros since 2017, will always hate the Astros. This is not because of my vitriol for the Houston Astros. This is, I'm simply looking at personnel, statistics, and facts. The Texas Rangers are the best team in the American League. Not just in the AL West, in the American League, period. End of story. Look at the Baltimore Orioles in the AL East. Toronto goes out and gets some pitching. We talked about how much the Orioles needed an experienced arm. They go out and get Jack Flaherty from the St. Louis Cardinals. They gave up, I think, a little bit more than they would have wanted to. But if I'm giving overall grades at this trade deadline, for bird teams specifically, give the Blue Jays a B+. They go out and get Paul DeYoung as well, just in case anything happens to Bo Bichette. But they get the pitching, they get the shortstop depth, the Orioles get the experienced starting pitching they need, and the Cardinals get 10 prospects back, which is ultimately what they needed to do. Then they still got to go out and get 3 starters in the offseason, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. From the Orioles' perspective, give them a solid B as well. They needed experienced starting pitching outside of Kyle Gibson. You might look at Jack Flaherty and think, these numbers are kind of mid. Keep in mind, there's a lot of pressure on Jack Flaherty with the Cardinals to be the ace. Now he goes to Baltimore, he doesn't have to be that guy. You look at the start he had on Thursday, against the Toronto Blue Jays in his Orioles debut. Dude shoved. 6 innings, 8 Ks, 1 run, 1 walk. He'd been walking guys left and right in St. Louis because he felt the pressure to be the ace every time he went out there. He goes to Baltimore, he doesn't have that pressure on him, which is great for him, and it's great for the Orioles. As far as buyers, if I'm giving grades, the Yankees did nothing, so they get an F, but who knows? They might even feel like they're out of it. Astros, you got Justin Verlander. Congrats. You didn't do anything else. C. Rangers, you got Max Scherzer, Jordan Montgomery, Chris Stratton, Austin Hedges. A. Stop the presses. The Rangers won the trade deadline. They were already the best team in the AL West and in the American League. They just made themselves even better. Behind them, Angels, A-. Felt like they could have done a little bit more, but they proved themselves as buyers. They proved themselves to Shohei Ohtani that, hey, we're going to make a run at this thing, and if you want to re-sign, this is our pitch to you. We're all in. As far as sellers go, there are really only a couple. The Mets, C. I still don't know why they sold, so they got pretty darn good prospects in return. Cardinals, B-. They could have gotten more, I felt like, but they ultimately got what they needed. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll talk NASCAR right after this. Back here on The Score with Brett Wiseman here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio, TobaccoRoadSportsRadio.com, 1470 WWBG AM Greensboro. We're here every single Saturday morning. And if you're watching on YouTube, you see that I got the Jeff Gordon throwback shirt on. That's because Wonder Boy, as he was known, turned 52 years old yesterday. That makes me feel old, even though, I was born 6 years into his career, but that's beside the point. Anyways, as far as the week in NASCAR is concerned, we're not going to talk a ton about the Cup race at Richmond because that was, I'm not going to say boring, but it was dominated by a guy that's known to dominate short tracks. It was kind of a coming out party, I guess you could say, for Roush Fenway Keselowski Racing, RFK. Chris Buescher wins the race at Richmond. He locks himself into a playoff spot. He's in good shape. And he did well at a track that he's done well at for a long period of time. The biggest story in NASCAR over the past week or so has been, or is, the Hall of Fame voting / induction class announcement. We knew that Jimmy Johnson and Chad Knaus were on the ballot. They got in. The third Allison brother got in. So the Alabama gang is complete, the NASCAR Hall of Fame. That was a long time coming. But what really gets me, and I got to adjust my position in my seat to talk about this because I'm really fumed about it. Jimmy Johnson was not a unanimous choice for the Hall of Fame. Then again, neither was Richard Petty, neither was Dale Earnhardt Sr., neither was Dale Earnhardt Jr., neither was Jeff Gordon. Or David Pearson. Or Cale Yarborough. Or Benny Parsons. The greatest drivers in the history of this sport, none of them were unanimous. The 3 7-time champions, not unanimous. And in this case, last week I talked about how much I despise and loathe Denny Hamlin, but he came out on Twitter and said something. It's the first time Denny Hamlin has ever said anything in his life I've actually agreed with. Denny Hamlin said, all right, that's disgraceful. It's disgusting. How is he not unanimous? Whoever didn't vote for him, make these ballots public. Whoever didn't vote for him is off. Whoever didn't vote for Jimmy Johnson, probably the same people that didn't vote for Dale Earnhardt Sr. and Richard Petty when they were on the ballot. Those people clearly are idiots. How is it possible that a 7-time champion, arguably the greatest driver in the history of the sport, arguably one of the greatest drivers in the history of motorsports as a whole, how is he not unanimous? How do you see that name on the ballot and go, oh, no, he's better than Jimmy. No one's better than Jimmy Johnson. No one on that ballot was even close to Jimmy Johnson. Are you kidding? I don't even need to see who was on the ballot to tell you that. It perturbs me to no end that a name like that with the stature and the accomplishments that he has was not a unanimous choice to the NASCAR Hall of Fame. It boggles my mind. It does. It makes no sense to me. And most of the writers, much like the Baseball Hall of Fame writers, most of the writers in NASCAR have been around the sport for a long time or grew up watching it. So generally, these people are, as far as I know, pretty knowledgeable. But I don't see how anyone in their right mind, any sane thinking person, could look at that ballot and say, somebody on here better than Jimmy Johnson. Now, the other thing I want to know, if they voted for Chad Knaus, Jimmy Johnson's crew chief, and did not vote for Jimmy Johnson, that makes even less sense. But we won't, get into that part of it. That's the case. Steam's really going to be coming out of my ears at that point. But I don't know if it's because, and there was never, this is not me as a Hendrick Motorsports fan / sympathizer. I don't know if it was anything to do with the fact that there were a few times Jimmy Johnson may have failed post-race inspection. There may have been a few times he, was able to, skirt the system a little bit. But every great driver in NASCAR history has found a way to do that or has been guilty of doing that. People were mad in the, late 2000s, early 2010s because Jimmy Johnson was winning all the time. Much like I don't watch Formula One now because I'm just going to assume that Max Verstappen's going to win the race if I wake up early enough to tune in. So it's not worth it. NASCAR got to that point where Jimmy Johnson was winning every fourth or fifth race. Still, that doesn't mean you're not appreciative of his dominance. Do I hate Tom Brady? Yeah, absolutely. I despise the man. But I respect what he did. I respect what he accomplished. I respect the player that he was. He is the GOAT. I say that as a Packers fan. He is the GOAT. He's the greatest of all time. I have enormous respect for him. I hate him, but I respect the heck out of him. A lot of people, I'm sure, may have felt that way with Jimmy Johnson. Those that didn't, and whose bias may have shown through in voting, if they're biased, if they think that Jimmy Johnson was, there's controversy with a lot of the things that Jimmy accomplished, no. If they thought, Jimmy won all the time because he cheated, Brady won the Super Bowl because of the deflated thing, or not denying anything. But it's the same argument I give to baseball in terms of Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, etc. We know why those guys aren't in the Hall of Fame. It's a moral thing. But their accomplishments prior to their usage of performance-enhancing drugs still probably would have been good enough to get him in the Hall of Fame. Jimmy Johnson could have won all those races without his splitter being half an inch off of the, inspection line or whatever. I've been sitting here for days trying to think of a reason that someone wouldn't vote for Jimmy Johnson to be in the NASCAR Hall of Fame. The only thing I can think of is that someone had some kind of bias, some kind of doubt, as irrational as that might be. Because if you're in your right mind, you don't see Jimmy Johnson on a NASCAR Hall of Fame ballot and go, yeah, this guy's better than him. Because no one is. No one is. I guarantee you when Tom Brady goes on the Football Hall of Fame ballot, unanimous. Bang. Look at baseball. Mariano Rivera is the only unanimous choice to the Baseball Hall of Fame. It's because there was never a closer like him. There never will be again. There never will be another Tom Brady. There sure as heck will never be another Jimmy Johnson. And that's why it's so confusing and befuddling that any sane thinking person voting on the NASCAR Hall of Fame would look at their ballot and bubble in someone that was not the driver of the 48. It makes No sense whatsoever. None at all. All right, got to get in the break. Desmond Johnson coming up with some Panthers talk on the other side of this time. Out. Welcome back to The Score with Brett Wiseman here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio, tobaccoroadsportsradio.com, WWBG 1470 AM Greensboro. We are here every single Saturday morning, and our fearless leader, Desmond Johnson, joins the program. He's the host of Bleav in Carolina Panthers podcast. He's the man, the myth, the legend who started this whole machine we know as Tobacco Road Sports Radio, the Keep Pounding Podcast Network, etc., etc. Des, we bring you on the show mainly for your Panthers expertise and also your, awesomeness. But 1 week here into training camp, joint practices with the Jets coming next week, Fan Fest on Wednesday. So that'll be the first, big chance for a lot of fans to see some of the new faces. But 1 week into camp here, what are some of the impressions that you've seen from those on site and from those that you're in contact with on the team?
It's funny. We just finished doing Embrace Debate with Four-Man Rush, Monty Fetty, and the Carolina Cat Chronicles host, Cody Lashley, and they both were down in Spartanburg last week and got a chance to see things up close and personal. Monty's down there all the time. And we were talking about this, and I asked them, I was like, what's the thing that you guys noticed? And a couple of different things, but the main thing that stood out was how prepared and how good Bryce Young is. I think it's really jarring for Panther fans to have good quarterback play. So like to see a guy come in and basically hit it every time, it's become more unusual that we haven't gotten anything negative reporting wise about Bryce Young. Like most of the stuff you've heard has been all good. And now I'm starting to see a shift in national media where you're starting to get national pundits latching onto this. They're seeing what's happening in Charlotte and they're like, yo, Bryce Young is good. Actually, Bryce Young is great. Coaching staff is great. This team's got talent. They weren't picking number one because they didn't have any talent. They were picking number one because they traded up from 9. They almost won their division last year in spite of themselves. So now they have some confidence at the top and you've got quarterback play. That's the one thing that Carolina hasn't had in the past 4 years. The number one thing that caused Carolina to lose football games over the past 4 years was quarterback play. And now you've got that stabilized. So that seems to be the biggest story coming out of Spartanburg is the play of Bryce Young, how much he has absorbed this playbook from Thomas Brown and Frank Wright, Josh McCown. And the fact that now, from my understanding, Skylar Callahan, beat writer for the Carolina Panthers for Sports Illustrated, he was telling us a story about how they were doing red zone practice. And they're at a point in their book where Frank Wright and others are just like telling Bryce, why don't you try doing this? Like they're letting him try things. Like he's past the point of learning the book. They're letting him try to expand the book at this point. This is day 6 of training camp. Like it boggles my mind how far advanced he has been, but maybe it shouldn't because he's been like this at every level he's been. He was the starting quarterback at Mater Dei in high school, number 1 football program in the country. He was starting quarterback, Heisman winner at Alabama, like the top college football program in the country. None of this should really be a surprise, but it kind of is. So Bryce is probably the main story coming out of all this right now.
Yeah, and you hit it right there. You and I both know, and we talked about it, his football IQ, his ability to learn so fast, it's not a surprise, I don't think, to either of us, really, given what we saw from him in college and given, his high school background. I don't think it's really a shock that he's, adapted so quickly. It's maybe a shock to some other people, nationally, but, this is something that, a lot of us that watched him in college kind of knew going in. But I think it's going to be interesting to watch, especially in these joint practices, how much of the playbook, we know he knows it, but it's going to be, for me at least, interesting to watch how much he expands upon it when he's allowed to experiment in these joint practices with the Jets next week, and how much playing time he gets in that first preseason game.
Honestly, I don't expect Bryce to play at all in the preseason. The Panthers have kind of made it a point that they're going to probably play Matt Corral, probably more than Dalton or Young, which I'm totally fine with because they probably need to play him anyway to get his value up if they're planning on trading him down the road or whatever the case may be. We kind of need. We never.
Plus, I don't Bleav he played. I don't Bleav he played in the preseason last year. Did he?
He got hurt in the preseason. He broke his foot in the preseason last year and missed the entire regular season. So we haven't really seen Matt Corral other than maybe about a quarter or two, week 1 or 2 of preseason last year. And from my understanding, he looks really good down there. But that's what happens when you've got Frank Wright and Jim Caldwell and Thomas Brown and Josh McCown whispering in your ear every day. You're probably gonna get better if you're playing quarterback. Those dudes know what they're talking about. So that we'll probably see more Matt Corral than anything else. Having said that, Bryce Young will get snaps of first string during the practices, the joint practices, and those might get a little snippy. And I may go down Wednesday to Spartanburg to watch that. Tickets are free through Ticketmaster. If I'm not mistaken, practice on Thursday begins at 10:15, if I'm not mistaken. So, and I'm in Kernersville. It's about a 2.5-hour drive. So, sitting there weighing whether or not I'm going to or not going to. I'm leaning towards going. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is going to be there. How many times can you say you saw Aaron Rodgers in August, practicing in Spartanburg?
Exactly.
So, it's one of them things where I'm like, yeah, I'm probably going to head down. And I think Stu said he was going down on Wednesday too. So I might try to link up with some content creators, some former Panthers or whatnot down there, and try to have a good time.
We need to ensure that the practices are going to be in the daytime because Aaron Rodgers decided to pull a stunt in the Hall of Fame game the other night and turned half the lights out at the start of the fourth quarter. And there's a shot of him on NBC kind of sitting back like this with the side, the lights off on his sideline. And NBC made the joke that he, brought everyone along for a second darkness retreat. So let's make sure the practices are in the daytime and make sure that he doesn't have access to the nearest holistic tea store.
Yeah. Hey man, that's his thing. He might be
spinning in circles.
That's his thing.
It is his thing.
He's very spiritual.
He's a lunatic, and I'm glad he's no longer a Green Bay Packer. Anyways.
Are you though? For real? Are you glad that he's gone?
I am.
A fan. Really?
Okay. I am 100%. I'm so pleased.
It's crazy. You and a few others. One of the biggest Packer fans I know is East Forsyth head coach Todd Willard. He's from Wisconsin. Like he grew up in Wisconsin, and he's a huge Packer fan. He does not like Aaron Rodgers. Like every time we bring him up, he talks about Rodgers like like he's probably really happy he's gone too. I didn't realize some of the fan base didn't really care for Rodgers like that, but I could kind of see why. Some of the stuff he went through the past couple of years.
I mean, right, and you know how staunch of an Aaron Rodgers defender I was there for the better part of 2020 and 2021, and then over the course of last season, I got sick of his sick of the drug. His thumb in London. He played like garbage the rest of the year. Yeah. He lied about how bad the thumb was, yada yada, so on and so forth. I was just sick of it. Then I saw Jordan Love come in for him, injured against an eventual NFC champion defense, and in 6 plays did more than Aaron Rodgers did that entire game.
So you feel good about Jordan Love taking over?
I feel really good about Jordan Love. I don't know really what the, it's like the NFC South. It's really a division of unknowns. We don't know how good or how not good Jordan Love can be. There's a ton of talent on Green Bay's defense. They have arguably the best cornerback in the league in Jair Alexander. They've got great depth at linebacker up front. They've got, other guys in the secondary that can step up. These young receivers are looking really good. I don't think we really saw as much as we could out of Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs because they weren't really allowed to shine as much early on in the season. Wasn't there in the offseason to build that trust. Jordan Love worked out with those guys in California for 4 or 5 months in between the offseason program, so they've got a rapport. But we also don't know. We haven't seen enough of Jordan Love outside of a fill-in start against the Kansas City Chiefs to really have a strong enough sample size.
And that's kind of the same what's going on in the NFC South. What's happening in the NFC North is kind of similar, although I'd say the NFC North is probably better equipped with Minnesota and Detroit and Green Bay and even Chicago to a certain extent. If I had to compare them to New Orleans, Atlanta, Tampa, Carolina, the main thing I'm starting to see is that the national media is starting to come around on what me and Stu have been saying for a couple of weeks, that Carolina's going to win this division. They're going to win it. And they're going to run away with it. But, everybody else has an issue. Like if you don't have a quarterback, or if you got 2 quarterbacks, you don't have any. And like Atlanta, they've got Desmond Ridder, mixed reviews with him. In Tampa, you got Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. I'm hearing that Baker Mayfield might not even start. So to me, Tampa's in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes. Like they're not even. I don't expect them to win more than 4 games. I think they want Caleb Williams or Drake May. So that's kind of the thing with them. And then you got New Orleans where they bring in Derek Carr, 9th year. I don't think he's ever won a playoff game. And people keep forgetting, the Saints are the oldest team on average in the NFC South. Their average age is 28 years old. That is an old team in the NFL.
Especially on defense.
Especially on defense. Father Time's undefeated. And eventually that's going to, play into that. The Saints, too, their coach, Dennis Allen, if I'm not mistaken, he's never had a winning season as a head coach, which is nuts. He was the Raiders head coach, which is what he's got familiarity with Derek Carr. And they're always hurt. Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas, like their main guys that are dependent on that we keep hearing. That's why people were picking the Saints at first. I'm like, they're never out there. Like the past 2 or 3 years, they've been banged up. So it feels like it's the Panthers' division to win. But it's the same situation. We haven't seen like Bryce Young and live bullets yet, just like Jordan Love. So until we see that, we won't know for sure. But I feel pretty confident about what we're seeing coming out of Spartanburg.
The biggest difference I see when you kind of compare and contrast those two divisions is there's a lot more quarterback stability with Carolina and every team in the NFC North.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe New Orleans than there is with Tampa Bay and Atlanta. I don't think Atlanta really trusts Desmond Ridder all that much because they only really started him for half the season last year. Tampa Bay doesn't know who their starter is going to be. It's dependent on one of those two guys throwing the ball to a guy with the same colored jersey, which is something that's hard for both of Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask.
Yeah.
That remains to be seen if that comes to fruition or not, if their, color blindness is cured. But you kind of hit on it with the Saints' age on defense. Then you look at Carolina's defense. It's young, it's quick, it's fast, and in a division of uncertain, unstable offenses, that could be, a real advantage for the Panthers on the defensive side of things.
Well, here's the thing, too. On the defensive side, people forget the one thing Matt Rule and company did right while they were here in their reign of terror was they drafted very well. Their very first draft, they drafted all defense, all 7 positions. First time in NFL history that's ever happened. And some of those guys are still key players with this team. To me, there's a potential all-pro at all 3 levels of the defense of Carolina, and that's what makes them different from everybody else in the league. You got Derek Brown, the defensive tackle that was taken 6 overall in the 2020 draft up front. You've got Frankie Louvu, who Jonathan Stewart proclaimed God sent him to us because we have no idea where he came from. He just got plopped into our lap and gave us 111 tackles last year and was a terror like all over the place. I think he's a potential all-pro. Shaq Thompson, the vet, the wily veteran, he's still back there, always a potential all-pro. And then in the secondary, you got J.C. Horn, who might be a top 5 cornerback in the league. He's had some injury issues the past 2 seasons, but if he can stay on the field and stay healthy, him and Dante Jackson make a pretty good cornerback tandem in terms of being able to cover people. And then you got Jeremy Chin wandering around the Troy Polamalu type role where he's kind of a rover of sorts. Von Bell, who got brought over from the Cincinnati Bengals, along with Xavier Woods from last year. The secondary is pretty good. Now they're thin depth-wise, and we'll see what happens with that if they can keep them all on the field. But talent-wise, this Panther defense has the ability, especially now with Ejiro being in charge of this, the defensive coordinator that came over from Denver that had a bunch of head coaching interviews this past offseason, including with the Panthers. Now you add him to the mix. And, oh, by the way, Dom Capers is our defensive assistant, whatever role they have him and Jim Caldwell in, where they're like special assistants. Dom Capers is the defensive special assistant with Evero. Like, come on, man. Like, what are we talking about here? Like, this Panther team, they're set up for success. Like, I can't imagine them winning less than 10 games with everything they got going on, barring injury.
We're going to show our age a little bit here, but I wasn't alive, but I've done my research because the Panthers were heavily intertwined with my Packers at that point.
Yes.
People seem to forget that Dom Capers was the original coach of the Carolina Panthers. And the main reason that the Panthers made the NFC Championship game in 1996, the unfortunate part was they ran into Brett Favre at Lambeau Field when it was 3 degrees. But the main reason the Panthers were so successful that year and that they took out the Cowboys was that defense.
Yep.
Led by Dom Capers. Now, Dom Capers wore thin on me in his time in Green Bay. Loved him in 2010 until about 2015, and then he got, stale. But then again, as does everybody. People seem to forget that Dom Capers brings a certain culture here as well.
And it comes back full circle. Of course, Frank Reich was the first starting quarterback in Panthers history as well. So
Right.
Dom Capers and Frank Reich came in together in 95. And for them to come back home and for this to be full circle for them and the team, it's just like night and day compared to where this team was last year at this point, or a couple of years ago at this point, where it was almost like the previous regime wanted to erase the culture of the Panthers and create their own. So they shunned former players. They just didn't get it. They didn't understand it. But when you bring in someone who actually has been here, Frank Reich's lived here the past 20 years. Like him and his family settled here. Like Dom Capers, same thing. Scott Fitterer during FanFest the other night when he was in the booth with Steve Smith and Taylor Zarzour, they were asking him about, what do you think? And he was talking to his wife the other day, and he was like, regardless of what happens with Carolina and his job, like down the road, they're going to probably settle in Charlotte. Like they love it here. The weather's nice. It's you can get to pretty much anywhere on the Eastern Seaboard. So the fact that they've already been here and Frank Reich's been ingrained in the fabric of Charlotte, that was the main problem I had with the Matt Rule regime to begin with. They didn't seem attached to the area. They didn't seem to understand, Carolina doesn't win every year, but there is a culture here. They've been here for a quarter of a century. Like there is a certain way of going about being a Carolina Panther fan, and they never realized what it was. Frank Reich knows what it is. Dom Capers knows what it is. And I think David Tepper is starting to see it more now that he's brought back these guys, because what they ended up doing, now you're prone to see a former Panther player just walking around on the training camp field. You might be out there and all of a sudden Steve Smith standing on the sideline coaching up Jonathan Mingo. He didn't have to do that. He didn't work for the Panthers, but he's a part of the Panther fabric. Or Thomas Davis might be walking around one day. I'm talking about going down to Spartanburg Wednesday. Jonathan Stewart's already said he's going to be down there Wednesday. So, I mean, it's like they're bringing the former players back, and that's helping everything too. So this is starting to shape up to one of the more anticipated seasons in Panthers history, to be honest.
Who knows? You may see Muhsin Muhammad or Ricky Prohl.
He was down there
running around at some point.
Yes, he was down there. Moose was down there with Smitty last week. They just pop in and out, and a lot of them still live in the area. So they just drive down to Wofford, 45 minutes. They pop in for a little bit, give some advice. But they're being welcomed in. That's the difference. Like they want the coaching staff wants them to come down and do it. So that's refreshing for a Panther fan to see.
You can see Mike Minter down there at some point. I mean, there's names that I grew up watching in my childhood, and you could say golden days of the Carolina Panthers when Jake Delhomme was the superhero savior of the made from scratch biscuit. Remember he had those Bojangles commercials. And Bryce Young has a deal with Bojangles, and if they don't reboot that, somebody's doing it wrong.
I just remember in that commercial, the dude at the beginning, the criminal or whatever, he's like, hey lady, you want some of these biscuits? And like lady's like,
see, that should have scared some people. That should have scared some people.
Like,
anyways,
biscuits,
things they got away with in the mid 2000s. We'll work this part in real quickly. There's been some roster shuffling and some moves on the defensive end as well. So what are you looking for, especially in this week of joint practices, and then when they get out there next week against the Jets? Who are some guys you're looking to prove themselves on the defensive side of things as these position battles start to heat up?
Oh, that's a good question. Prove themselves. Shot Tuttle comes to mind first. The nose tackle actually played at North Davidson, I think, if I'm not mistaken. He played somewhere nearby Charlotte, so he's kind of a hometown kid, came back home. He's basically side by side with Derek Brown on that front line. Curious to see how that affects Derek Brown's play, because I think he's set up to have a monster year. Trying to think. Probably who emerges as the other defensive end in this defense. You've got Brian Burns on one side, and they're still negotiating out his long-term deal, but they really need someone else to complement him on the other side. He hadn't had that since he had Hassan Reddick here 2 years ago. And Reddick ended up leaving to go back home to Philly and played for the Eagles. And he was a Temple guy. So he was a Matt Rule kind of guy that got brought in, used that year to his advantage, got him a big high dollar deal and skipped town. And we haven't really had anybody on that other side since then. when we did have Hassan Reddick on that other side, the Panthers were second in overall defense the entire year that year in 2021. So I think that's critical. They can find someone to put right there. If somebody emerges to be right there, and then the defense, everything else flows from off of that. So that's probably the main thing I'd be checking for on defense is who emerges as the DE number 2 for the Panthers.
Have those names highlighted on my Mick Mixon copy-pasted spot chart that I'll use when I watch the preseason game next week.
Shout out to my guy, Mick.
Mick, what a guy. I had the pleasure to meeting him back in 2014, 2015. I told him I was a Packers fan. He walks me into his office, and he's just got filing cabinets full of every single spot chart of every game he's ever done, and all the Packers stuff is highlighted in green and yellow, and I'm just sitting there drooling over it as a play-by-play guy. I'm like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen.
Mick's
Before I let you go,
he's sitting at the farm right now, so shout out to Mick Mixon.
Oh yeah,
great friend, good guy.
He's living it up. He's chilling. But before I let you go, do you know the status of Cameron Peoples? I know he was carted off the other day. He's an App State guy, so I got to know what's going on with him.
I don't off the top of my head. Just kind of go check real quick with the Panthers to see if there's any updates with him. Unsigned free. Well, he was a undrafted free agent. He was in the running back room. Did he get hurt during FanFest or?
I Bleav he did. I can't remember if it was FanFest or practice, but I sincerely hope he's okay.
I don't see anything major out there regarding any kind of major injury or anything with him. So it's probably something minor. I'd imagine that he'd be ready to go, if not by the end of preseason. But for him, it's critical to get on the field at this point. Right. Being undrafted, you kind of can't miss any days, especially when you're that deep on the depth chart. So hopefully, you can be able to get back on the field.
I'm hoping he can find a way onto the active roster, if not latch onto the practice squad. Because Panther fans, if you don't know this guy, he has the all-time record for rushing yards in a bowl game. By the way, had about 300 some rushing yards. His name is spelled Camerun. He's a running back, and his name literally has run in it. Okay, he's also like 6'5", 220, so he's a unit. So if you don't know this guy, if you see him on the field, you will absolutely love him because he runs like a gazelle. So you will absolutely love him. Des, we love you, and we thank you every time you come on this program and for everything you do for us.
Hey, man, appreciate you having me on. Anytime you need me, just let me know, and appreciate you with the score, bro.
Hey, we'll see y'all next week.